Friday, March 21st, early morning. Uncle Pete's talking again, and it's session number 26 on a topic that the group voted on. It's called Multilanguage Options at Login. So here you go, Pete.
All right. Well, morning, Tim, Arnold.
Uncle Pete.
Good morning, Chris, our participant. We're doing a webinar for Chris this morning. Apparently, he gets a bonus star. All right. So we're talking about multi-language, and I've always made the joke that I would never develop multi-language because as soon as I sell every English-speaking person a copy of my program, I'd move on to the other languages. But our world continues to get smaller and smaller, and I've started doing a lot of consulting with groups from the UK and so forth, and I'm having to see what they deal with a little more. They definitely have no choice because there's so many different languages spoken near them that to capture the market, they pretty much have to support multiple languages. So I've had to start figuring it out and learning it. And of course, as you would expect, WinDev does make our life a whole lot easier. So that's what we're going to do today. Is going to show you a few things that we've done. And if you haven't done any multi-language, we're going to give you just a brief primer into what features are there in the out of the box with WinDev. So let's go through that. Let me mute Scott real quick. All right, so let's start off with just where the basic multi-language features of WinDev are. And if you come into project description and go to the languages tab, you will see for this particular project, I have set up 6 languages: English, German, French, American, Spanish, and Italian. For each of those languages, you've got options to set up how numbers are treated, currency, time, dates, durations, a few other options. And you also define which of your languages is your default language. As you see in this project, that language is English. Now, you may be wondering why I have English and American both listed. And the reason for that is because there are a number of not only phrases, which generally doesn't affect us, but there are a lot of spelling differences. Center, color. There's a lot of words that are spelled different, English versus American. So we added American so that we could get those spellings and so forth correct between the different captions. So once you've added the languages that you intend to support at the project level, then if you come in and look at one of your screens, any captions, statics, pretty much any control, you now have all of these. Instead of just one caption field, you've got a caption for each language you're supporting. And since we're up to 6 here, you see we have each of those languages listed. So now I can put in a different caption for each language. Now, one other feature of the IDE is in string fields. If you put a string in, like, let's scroll up to one of the ones here. I'll just use this one. These haven't been updated since we added 3 more languages. notice this little icon next to my string. That's the little translate icon. And it also, you probably can't see it real well on the screen, but it's got a number 6 in there telling me there are 6 translations. Some of these that we started out supporting 3 languages, and then we went back and added 3 more. So some of these we haven't updated have 3 on them. And if I hover over it, you'll see the ones that are empty that I haven't done a translation for yet. But what you do is you click on that icon, and then you get to the translation screen. Pretty much the same as what you saw in the captions. Now I've got the 6 languages listed. I can put in a translation for each language. There is a bit of a trick to get that translation up for the first time. If I just do my string is string equals my string, notice there's no translate icon there. What you need to do is highlight your string, including the quotes, and that is very important to also highlight the quotes. If you don't highlight the quotes, what happens is you wind up with a translation with an extra set of quotes, and it's not going to behave the way you expect it to. So always make sure you get the quotes in your highlight, and then right-click. We can't do it while we're running a test. So stop that test. Now if we right-click, we get the translate option on the menu. We choose that, and now we have our translate screen that we saw earlier, and we can put in our different translations. We'll talk about this little pop-up menu you're seeing me use here later in the webinar. So now, once I've gone through that translate menu once, now you see that I have that little icon to translate the string. So both fixed strings and strings that are captions and so forth on your controls give you the ability to set their values for all the languages that you're supporting based on your project. So that's the basics of the multi-language support inside the IDE and your project. So now the question is that's great and wonderful. What do you do with all that? Well, what you do is, remember I set a default language in the project description. By default, that is what your program is going to run. That's the language it's going to use. Now you can do some things with the setup builder to give them the option of which language they want to install, so that they can install the French version or the Spanish version, what have you. What we decided to do instead, because this particular product is going to be installed in places where there may be multiple language-speaking users there. So we decided to instead give the user the ability to set their language preference at login time. And I'll run this app and let you see what that looks like. It's a little while to run this app because it's hitting that UK database. All right, so we see this drop down, and you'll notice that it shows all of the 6 languages that we are supporting in the drop down: English, German, French, American, Spanish, and Italian. So if I select French instead and then log in, notice now that all of my menus, everything is in French. And now the text that they've typed in obviously is in whatever they typed in, but all of my captions and so forth. And we're just now going through and cleaning up this app, so you see a few things that we haven't translated yet. And that's one of the challenges of this, is it's an ongoing thing of making sure that you do get all your translations in place. But as you see, it was that easy to select another language, and now all of our captions and so forth are showing that other language.
Hey Pete,
Now,
I have a question.
yes, sir.
So, if you knew in the beginning that this is going to be a multilingual program, would you approach it one way versus just doing it all in English first and coming back later to all the strings?
You you definitely want to do it as you go. So we started out with 3, but several months into the development decided that we needed to add 3 more, and we had to go back to every screen, every control, and touch them again. So it's a pain in the butt. There is no silver bullet with multi-language development. As we sometimes think that there's these silver bullets that's going to solve the world's problems for us, and they generally don't work out that way. Now, WinDev does have another tool that they sell, and we'll at the end perhaps. I don't know how much Tim knows about that tool, but I'll give him a hint that we're going to call on him at the end of the class and let him speak about that tool just a little bit if he'd like, because I know nothing about that tool. I haven't used it firsthand at all. I know a few folks that have used it, and like I said, since I haven't used it myself, I will reserve my comments about that tool until I actually use it myself. But as far as I understand, what it's about is helping you pull the strings out, translate them, and get them back into your app. But I've also heard that it's much harder to use than what you would like. Everything I'm showing you is straight out of the WinDev box, so there is no extra pieces to buy or anything, but it does require a little bit of work. So to answer your question, if I knew I was going to support these languages, I would add those to the project right up front and do the translations as I go. So every time I add a control to the screen, I would do the translations for it. This is another instance of, why you want to do all that work in your analysis up front, because if you do those captions in your analysis and get those translations done there, then as you add them to the screen, the translations are already done. So, it's another reason for that whole, do the work in your analysis first. So anyway, back to the app.
Yeah, but Pete, on that same regard, don't you think it kind of slows your flow that you have to translate as you go? Because you go in there, you drop this box, and this group, and then some buttons, and then you might change it a little later, and
and what I tend to do is I kind of do it towards the end of the window. When I've got the window pretty close to being done,
that's what you mean as you go. Okay.
Yeah. I don't necessarily do it control by control. I kind of play back and forth with it. A lot of stuff I'm doing, I know it's going to be there, so I'll do it as I go. But kind of the last thing I do when I feel the window is done is go back through and make sure that all the translations are there. But at the end of the day, You know, and I know almost none of us have that kind of budget to do it, but you know, we if we have a QC person, that QC person actually what they need to do before you ship this thing out the door, log in with each language, go through every screen, and make sure that, you know, because if you don't put in a translation for French, you're not going to have any caption there at all. You know,
Oh,
if
it's just
I,
blank. It doesn't pick the default English or
well,
something?
it does and doesn't. It depends on, you know, if you had that language in there from the beginning, when you first add the control, it uses the same caption for all of them. But if you added a language later, as you saw on some of those where it showed empty, empty
Mm-hmm.
is exactly what it says it is, empty. So you know,
Gotcha.
you're either going to get a bad translation or you're going to get nothing in there for your caption. So you pretty much have to log in with each language and run through all your screens to make sure everything is really perfect. You know, it's a lot of extra work. No way around it. It's
And you
work.
should expect that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but and that's why, you know, I would never expect any tool to solve all those problems for me. You know, it's a complicated problem. Yeah,
Right.
and Chris mentioned sizing the captions is a pain also. Uh,
That's another
and
good reason,
towards
right? For
yeah, towards the end of this conversation, I wouldn't mind opening up the mic and just kind of having a roundtable because there's a lot of issues like that that I think we could talk about that aren't necessarily part of the development, just your approach to multi-language in general. But let's hold that stuff to the end of the webinar and let's go through the
okay.
code that I've got here first. All right, so when I reran the application, now notice that because I had logged in French, when I reran the application, now it's showing French as my preferred language. And we'll see how I'm doing that in the code. I'm actually storing this user's preference to what language they want to use. And of course, you see all the captions are in French now. And I will change it back to English. Now, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this in the webinar, but if you watch really closely, you'll notice that this main menu back here actually closes and reruns. I don't know if you got to see that or not, but we'll look at the code and see why that is here shortly. So what we've got is a combo box of our supported languages on the login. We're storing that as a preference. So now let's go take a look at some of the code that makes all this stuff possible. All right, the first thing, and some of this is just the way I develop. You know, there's definitely different ways to do almost everything in WinDev. Global variables, I tend to create a class that technically really isn't a class, it's just a variable holder. It just lets me kind of group all my global stuff together. And one of the other things I do very similar to that is I tend to have a lot of lookups that really don't need the user to edit them, but I also don't want to hard code them anywhere in case I ever need to add one. This list of countries is a perfect example of that. Obviously, an end user couldn't add a supported language to the list, but it's also something I don't want to hard code into the combo control. So I use a structured array for that, and then in this systems variable class, which is my global variables, I'll do what I call fixed lookups. I'll create a structured array for that lookup, so I've got one place to edit it, and then I use that array throughout my entire application. So this system variables class is going to be all my global variables. The first thing I do is this is that structure that I declare for all my fixed lookups. And we go through this, you'll see that I've got probably 30 different fixed lookups because we have a lot of different statuses and things that we set up as fixed lookups for this application. You know, the user can't change those statuses, but we want to store status numbers instead of the strings in all of our tables. So we did those as fixed lookups. So we declare the structure. Now the next thing we do after we declare the structure is if we come down, we will see right here is a language is an array of lookup structure. So I've declared an array of that structure, and you'll hear us talking on Skype quite a bit about structured arrays. That is a structured array. It's an array of a structure. A structure is a data source. It's not necessarily. It's very similar to a compound variable, but not quite the same thing. It is a stream of data, a record buffer. There's a lot of different ways to think about it, but it's a grouping of variables. And then by doing an array of that, you've created something very similar to a memory table by doing an array of a structure. All right, so now in my system variable class, I've got my structured array declared. Now the next thing I do is in the constructor class, I'll come down here and I'll declare an instance of that structure. And why am I doing that? Because a structure is a variable type. It actually is not a variable itself. In other words, you can't use that structure directly. You got to declare an instance of that structure. Another way to think about that is, you know, when you declare a variable, you go, my string is string. String is a type. You can't use string. It's just a type. Structure is a type. You can't use it. You got to declare a variable of that type. So Lookup Req is the actual variable we're going to use here. And then right here, I am adding all of the supported languages to that array. So I'm saying Lookup Req name, English, value, and there are constants for all of the languages that WinDev supports, and you can find them in the help. So nation English, nation German, French, American, Spanish, Italian. I'm using those constants to set the values, and then as you see, I haven't done all these translations because we haven't touched this in a long time. We've got to come back and clean this up. And you wouldn't think languages would have that kind of translations, but they do because you know, it'll be Deutsch in the German and different things like that. So even the name of the language, you really should translate. And this is another advantage to doing those lookups this way is I do my translation right here in the array. I can do this right here. And have those translations to that language. So my combo box is going to display name. It's going to show that language in whatever language is the currently selected language.
Hey, can you highlight the Italian down there and remind me what you clicked on to create that, please?
Because it doesn't have any translations yet,
Yeah.
what you do is you highlight the whole thing, including the quotes, right-click, and do translate.
That's it. Okay.
Yep. As you see, I mean, it's not hard work, but there's a lot of work, and this kind of goes to your question, Arnold. Would you do it up front or in the back? You see all these with threes. Those are from back before we decided to add the other three languages. So, you know, it's, we have to go back and touch every one of these and get those other three translations in place. So it's a lot of work, no doubt about it. It's not hard work, but it's, the one thing that we tend not to have, because most of us run small shops, is extra time, especially for grunt work. So it definitely uses some of that time up. So now, if you haven't dealt with classes, you may not be familiar with the constructor method. And what that is the constructor method fires when we create an instance of this class. So as soon as we create an instance of the system's variable class, all the code inside the constructor method is going to run. And since we're really only going to declare one instance of the system's variable class because we're just using it as our global variables, by putting all this code to add all of our arrays and set up all of our arrays, once we declare our system's variable class, all those arrays will be populated. It's one line of code. And if we pop over to our project code, we see that line right here. Glow is systems variables. I've now declared an instance of the systems variable class with the name GLO. And why do I do that? It's a little bit of my old Clarion showing through. It lets me do glow dot, and there's all my global variables. So, that kind of gets, it's a little warm fuzzy from my Clarion days. I also like that, it just makes it very obvious what my global variables are throughout my entire project because they're all glow dot. If I need to edit them or something, I can go edit them right in that class. And I don't have a ton of code clogging up the project code. It's all in that class. So it just makes things a little cleaner. You could have done all that code over here if you wanted. Again, lots of ways to do stuff in WinDev. So at this point, just by declaring this line in our project, we now have those arrays that we set up. The other line of code that we have in our project is this line of code right here. And we'll kind of pick this statement apart a little bit. Diem is the default manager, which is one of my open source classes that you can download off of my website. What it is the default manager lets you store all kinds of data without having to declare tables and so forth specifically for that data. We use it for user preferences, system options, a lot of different things, report options, really handy for a lot of different things. It stores both in the registry or in a database table. It can store as a system-wide, application-wide, user-specific, Windows-specific, lots of different options. And like I said, you can go up on my website and read about it, download it, play with it, whatever you want. And what we're doing here today, we're storing it in the registry. In other words, I don't want to store this in the database because I may not have made the connection to the database yet. So instead, I'm going to store it in the registry. So it's a machine level option, basically. So from the registry, I'm going to look for an entry called language. And return that value. Now, what getDefault does is if there is no entry already out there for language, then this will be the default nation English. So what I've done is say, go find out what language is set up in the registry for this app. If there isn't one, assume it's English. And that value is returned, and then we use this nation statement, which is a WinDev function that sets our language to that language. So if we have nation French stored in the registry, nation French it will change the language of our project to nation French. This statement is what causes all of our captions to show English, Italian, French, what have you. It's because we're getting out of the registry the user's preference and setting the nation to that language. And nation is the trigger that tells your project to show the captions for that language.
Pete, I have a question.
Yep.
So if you're doing WebDev, you would use like a cookie instead of the registry?
Yeah, you could use a cookie or the user's logged in. Now there's also a way to tell the language of the browser. Lots of different ways. Yes, Chris, you can get the language from the OS as well, and that is with if you use nation by itself. It's also a function. So nation like that returns whatever the current nation is.
The locale.
And we'll actually see that statement as well. Yeah, for the browser, you can also pull it out of the browser. Now, I've had some issues with that of it wanting to use the wrong language and so forth. And that's something else we're going to talk about at the end of all this is, what we're doing right now is all WinDev. WebDev does add some challenges to the whole multi-language thing. So now let's go look at the actual logon screen. First is our combo control. And if we look at it just in the content, all we're doing is saying that it's using that global variable that we declared. Then we have name displayed and value returned. So it's going to display English, German, French, and it's going to return that constant of nation English, nation Italian, nation French. So nothing fancy there. Now if we look at the code behind the combo, or actually before we do that, let's look at some of the other code here. There's a global variable for this procedure, procedure level global, declared as language changed. That's a Boolean. And we'll see what I'm doing with that here shortly. And then in the, excuse me, the end of the initialization of the window, I'm setting that combo to nation. And here's that other version of the nation function call. So what I'm doing is I'm finding out what the current nation is and setting that combo box to that nation. Now remember, over in the project code, which fired before this code, we looked that up out of the registry using the default manager and set nation to whatever the user's preference is. So now what we're doing is setting this combo box so that its value is whatever that user's preferred language is. And that's why you saw the second time I logged on after having logged on as French, the combo box showed French. It's this statement right here that's causing that to take place. Now if we look at the code in the combo box for selecting a row, whenever you select a row, all we do is issue that nation statement again, this time with the value of the combo box. Remember, the value returned by the combo box when we set that up on the content screen was the value of the array, which was that constant of nation English, nation French. So all we have to do is set nation to nation French, nation English, whatever language they've selected. So whenever you drop down that combo box, we change the default language of the project using this nation statement. And then we set that global variable, it's a procedure global of language change, we set that to true. And I promise we're getting real close to seeing why we're doing that. So then this is the actual code of the login, and the first thing it does is go through and verify the login. Once it's verified the login, one of the things it does is this little bit of code right here. If the language changed, and now you see why we have that global variable, that procedure global. So if you change the language, if you use that combo and dropped it down and changed the language, we want to save that new default out to the default manager. So the next time you log in, we know what your preferred language is. So this statement's very similar to the get default, except it's the save default. And now that's doing is writing that entry into the registry. So nothing fancy there. The trick is this use WDO main. That one's a little trickier. What WDO main is our main ribbon bar. It's the menu of the app, the main window of the app. This window right here. Well, the way this code is written, the main menu is already displayed before the login screen is. And I tend to write my apps that way because I just think it looks better to have the full app up and then the logon screen instead of just having a logon screen floating in the middle of nowhere without an app behind it. So the problem with that is when we issue that nation statement, every window opened from that point forward, the captions and so forth will be displayed using the correct language, but any existing open window, it's not going to go back and refresh those captions. It displays those captions when the window is first opened. So if we didn't do something, our main menu would remain in the language. So if that user was using English, if the prior preference was English, and that user logs in and chooses French, if we didn't do something, the main menu would remain in English because it was already opened. Now, every other window he opens would be in French, but the main menu would be in English, which wouldn't be doing him a whole lot of good. The use statement is a WinDev function that says, close all the existing open windows and open this window as the only open window. It's pretty much the same thing as restarting your application, except you don't rerun the project code, you don't lose any of your global variables or anything you've done. But what does happen is any windows get closed and whatever window you specify is opened. So since main menu, WDO main is our main window, basically it gets closed. Any other windows that are open get closed, and it gets opened. And now because it's being reopened after we've reset the language, now the captions are in the proper language. So that's what the use statement is for there.
Pete?
Yeah.
At that same spot, if I change the language, can I translate the login screen at the same time? What would I call there? Because I notice you don't change it.
Yeah, it's the only way to do that would be to issue that use statement at the combo drop down time, and it would actually close that window and reopen it, and I just didn't like that interface. So we decided that, the user probably could figure out the login, whether it was in their language or not, to get logged in the first time.
That's a bummer because
You probably could do some kind of manual translation or something, but as far as I know, there's no way to do a refresh that will just automatically refresh those captions of an already open window. Yeah, Chris, as far as I know, the translation takes place when the window is first displayed. So once it's open, issuing that nation statement doesn't automatically refresh those windows. As far as I know, there's no command that refreshes that window other than closing that window and reopening it. And like I said, Arnold, you could get real fancy in that combo box with some kind of a loop back to the project code or something to close and reopen that anytime they choose something from that combo. We just didn't do that work. I'm sure you could come up with a way to do it, but anything that you do, you would actually see that window close and reopen.
And that's just because of that nation deal.
Yeah, because until you it's not going to change your captions until you reopen the window.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
All right. So at that point, that's really what we're doing. We're saving that default language. We're storing it in the project code, and giving that user that option of changing the language as part of login, which was really what today's talk was about. Now, I've got a little bonus material for you. And you guys have seen me using the little magic button, but that little magic button is not in WinDev by default. By default, those translations for the captions you would have to do yourself. So you may have been thinking that I either speak an impressive number of languages, which I know you all know me well enough to know that ain't the case. Yeah, or that I have a stack of translation manuals on my desk, which also sounds like a way more work than I would do. Or that I have Google Translate open on a browser window on one of my 4 screens, and I'm doing a whole lot of copying and pasting. And sadly enough, that used to be the way I did multi-language translations until I found out how easy it is to set up the IDE to do them for you automatically. And all you do is you come into Home, Options, and go to General Options of WinDev. Hang on just a second. When you do that, you'll get this window right here. And you come down here to Google Translate and put in your API key from Google. Now, this is a paid service. Google actually charges you to have a API key for Google Translate. My bill has never been over 10 cents a month. So it ain't a lot of money. It charges you, a penny for every 100 translations or some crazy thing. It's not much. If you had an application that was doing a ton of on-the-fly translations, that could be an issue. But setting it up inside the IDE just so that you can get your translations done, no big deal whatsoever. So anyway, if you come here and click the Help button, it will take you to this help page, which also gives you the links for how to go get your, you have to set up a Google account and get an API key from Google. So once you've done that and put in that API key here, that's what enables this button right here. And that button right there is a great button, because what it does is when you click on that button, it says, okay, you can translate this from any of the other languages that have a value. So all I do is I type in the English version, and then I come down here and say English to French, English to American, English Spanish, English Italian, and that's how I get all my other translations done. So, I type it in once, and then I do the clicks for the other options. Now, like I said, you don't get this button unless you have the IDE configured to do Google Translate. There are some other translation options out there, but Google Translate's the one that I know how to set up and configure. And, it works real good. And like I said, I've paid less than 10 cents a month to get those translations. So, I think that's money well spent. Now, let me mention a couple of things that this, like everything is not perfect. First of all, when I showed you the string translations, my string is string equals my string. If you do this, and come in here and use your Google Translate to translate these and save it, but then when you come over here, see how when you hover over that icon, it shows you the translations that you did? If you're doing that and you don't see the translations getting made when you're doing them with Google Translate, that is a bug that I reported and they sent me a fix for. They sent me a DLL that fixes that. So if you run into that instance, you probably need that updated DLL. I don't know if they've made that.
Line 41, the G has a space in front of it for string.
Yeah.
Oh, you did that on purpose.
It was just to get to that translate thing. But that I don't know if they've made that DLL part of one of the public updates yet or not. So if you don't get that translation saving when you're using Google Translate on strings, just remember that there is a DLL update. Another issue that we're running into, and I've reported this as a bug, but don't have a response back from them yet. To be honest with you, I don't know if this translates. Never done this. Yeah, no, can't translate it that way. All right. If you have a multi-caption, and I know where I can get to one. Some over here, like right here. Invoice summary. I translate that. Oh, because it's not actually, there we go. If I do that as 2 lines, notice when I translated that, it put a /r/n, which looks to be rich text to me, instead of the carriage return. And unfortunately, that /r/n is what shows in German instead of a carriage return. I don't know if that's Google Translate doing that, or if it's PCSoft doing that, but either way, I suspect PCSoft could solve that by the string that they get back from Google doing a replace of /r/n with a carriage return. I've reported that as a bug, but haven't gotten it back from them yet. So what I have to do is actually, after it translates, go in and get my carriage return back in there. Yeah, and as Chris says, Trace does something very similar. It's like they're translating it to rich text or something. So that's another issue that that you'll see with the Google Translate. And then the last thing I'm going to mention is I've made a suggestion to them, because we as WinDev developers are very spoiled. And as you saw right now, I type in the English description and then click, click. So to get my other 5 languages in, it's a total of 10 clicks. Well, that's 10 more clicks than I want to do. What I want to do is type in my English description, click here, and have an option here that says translate all the other languages based on this language. So that way I could type in English, click, click, and all the other 5 languages would get translated. That, that's the 10 times faster to me.
That would be way better, especially if you have like 15 languages.
Right. Yeah, and I've made that suggestion to them. Again, I haven't heard back. They do have this window here that you get to it by clicking down here, but I don't know what it really does for you. It doesn't seem to.
The refresh the translations, that's one button right there. I wonder if that.
Yeah, but it doesn't. It doesn't actually do anything. See, it doesn't. You still have to click on each one of these. So yeah, I'm not sure what this window is all about, because it doesn't seem to do anything that I can't do with this little button up here. So now let's just talk in some general multi-language issues, and Chris brought up an important one earlier, and you can see it right here on this screen. Invoice summary. Look at the German translation for invoice summary. That caption is not going to fit very well. So Google Translate, all those things can do a great and wonderful job of translating the words, but that doesn't mean that those words are going to fit your screen, because some languages have much larger words than other languages. So this is the point where it comes down to there is no silver bullet for this. You either need to leave a bunch of space for the caption to make sure that the caption fits for all the languages, or you've got to come up with the German abbreviation for that, which, I haven't found a tool yet that gives you multi-language abbreviations, which brings up my next point. We tend to do a lot of captions like this. That's not going to translate by Google Translate. Google Translate doesn't translate abbreviations. So you have to use literal words for Google Translate to help you out. You know, it doesn't know how to translate abbreviations. It also doesn't do any English to American translations. So if we type in center with the English spelling of center, right here, the English flip the R and the E for center. Notice if I just do a translate, it translated it literally. As far as Google Translate is concerned, English and American are the same thing, and it does a one-for-one translation. It does not do any spelling or terminology translations between English and American. So those things that are spelled slightly different or phrased slightly different between English and American, we have to do those translations manually. And then, of course, the other thing is just to, Google Translate. Any of us that have been on Skype and tried to have a conversation with Adreno know Google Translate can translate the words, not necessarily the meaning. So, you still need to have a native speaking person of whatever language you're supporting go through your app, and I guarantee you there's going to be a lot of things that they make recommendations on changes and so forth. So, what we've showed you today will probably get you to that 80% mark, which is great because now you can just pay someone for the tweaks instead of paying them to translate every single caption and static and so forth on your screen. And that's the end of my talk. Like I said, I'd be more than happy to if we can have just a roundtable conversation. I will mention that WebDev. There are some other issues with doing multiple languages in WebDev. I haven't experienced it because I haven't used it, but both Glenn Rathke and I believe John Figg have struggled with. Once you start supporting multiple languages in WebDev, every time you generate your pages or anything, it gets exponentially slower because it's generating all that HTML code and everything for every language you support. So supporting multi-languages in WebDev can be a bit of a pain and a slowdown to the development process. So I haven't done any multi-language web dev sites, so I can't really comment directly on that one, but it's just something else that you need to be aware of. Tim, I saw you had posted the price on that tool. I assume you guys haven't used it yourself for anything or have any additional information on it.
You know who used it was Andy.
Yeah, well, and that's the reason I said I reserve my comments because I will tell you, Andy used it. Andy is not using it.
Yep, that's what I figured.
Yeah, it's from what I understand, it's difficult to use and doesn't necessarily get you where you need to go. But again, I haven't tried to use it myself, so I don't want to pass on a rumor, but I'm afraid it may not be a silver bullet.
Okay. How about some other people? Do you have some comments on language translations? Your experience. I put all the links on, so if you want to click on, join us. That's what this is for. Wolfgang, have you done anything, or Lewis, or Chris? Otherwise, we gotta
No, I haven't done any.
Hey, Pete.
Yes.
Go, Chris.
Am I on? Okay.
Yeah, you're on.
Is there, or have you tried to do anything similar to the Clarion translator, where it just does a global library or dictionary of all the words
That's what
in your app?
that's what that tool that we talked about is, Chris. Somehow it does some kind of export of all of your captions unless you translate them and create some kind of library of them. But again, Tim put the price up. It's somewhere in
Yeah,
the
I saw that.
$600-700
Yeah,
range.
$700 or so.
Yeah, and like I said, from what I understand from Andy, it didn't work well. Was a bit of a struggle. I think what it is it's very good at getting all of your captions and stuff out, and basically gives you a file that you can then go in and do the translations.
Right.
But then when you try to get them back into your screens, is where it falls apart and becomes very difficult. I'm not sure, but Andy played with it for a month or so and threw it away, and that was the point where I decided that I didn't want to spend my $700 experimenting with it.
I was under the impression that it also translated or made available for translation all of the error messages and stuff that are in the runtime.
Yeah, I'm not
down
sure.
To that level,
yeah.
But
yeah,
to keep the French error messages from popping up.
Yeah, well, and you bring up a good point there because that's the other piece of this that the IDE itself, as we all know, sometimes falls into showing us the wrong language.
Yeah.
And so if they can't get their own tools to 100% do it correctly, I don't have faith in that tool making my product do it correctly. Yeah, so that's where I'm at on it. Because the IDE not only error messages, but sometimes just prompts fall into the wrong language.
Yeah, because I used a Clarion one on a large project that had needed to swap out between units of measure. So reports that were done in newtons and foot-pounds, and changed things, on the fly. It really worked well.
Right.
But I don't know how that would work in this.
Yeah, and of course, there's a difference between doing that and doing it for your entire application and all of your captions and everything.
Right.
It just becomes exponentially a bigger issue, just like we talked about with the size of your captions and different things like that. Abbreviations kill you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was thinking along the lines of the recompile problem that John was having.
Right.
If it was a library, then it only needs to do it once, and then all the controls are enumerated, and you have control over that.
And I've got in fact it's in this app. I've got a Popup Help class that I'll show you guys. It's going to be released open source. I just haven't gotten around to doing it yet. That works on the principle you're talking about, Chris. As soon as it ever comes up here. All right. There. That's my pop-up help class that's doing these little pop-ups here.
Oh, changing the tooltips?
Yeah, and it's actually doing Google Translate on the fly for those. And if we come over here to administration, maybe it's under system. There we go. It's actually storing those in the database so that you could go in and edit those translations down the road. So it's going under the same principle that my default manager uses, my security classes use, of at runtime, it builds the database on the fly. You set up the defaults as a developer, and then on the fly, those are stored in the database where they can later be overridden by the end users. So that kind of gives you the best of both worlds. You can do the on-the-fly Google Translate, but then you can override that translation later if you need. So that same kind of principle would hold true. You could do there are statements that let you enumerate all the controls of your screen and so forth. So you could write something that picks your screen apart, stores all the captions in a database, and as you open a window, pull up the captions for whatever language you're using. You know, I haven't gone there because that's a whole lot of work.
That's a monster.
So, yeah, so I haven't bothered to write that. And John and I actually spoke about his issue quite a bit, and I suspect that may be the answer for WebDev if I ever face that problem. You know, hopefully he's going to beat up on them and get a solution to the actual issue before then. But
well, he certainly has them listening anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're doing, but they certainly are noticing him. This is good. And this goes on the fly, which means they, you know, if they're using their desktop app, they need to be able to get out to the web to Google Translate to update the translations, or does it do it once, load it, and
well, once
if
there's a translation, if the translation already exists in a database, it uses the database entry. If there isn't a translation in the database, then it hits Google Translate and does the translation.
So it's not doing
but
that
again,
every
as long
time they start their app.
No, it does it once and then uses the database after that. And that's what allows you to override the translations, is because once they're stored in a database, all you do is edit the database, and that's what's going to get displayed.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, our intentions are, you know, once we've got this application ready to release to the world, we will have someone sit down and go through this table and clean up all those translations for each language.
Yeah, but it's nice to have them there for them to just clean up.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it versus, you know, giving someone English of everything you got and saying, here, you know, I need all these languages. What we're able to do is say, okay, here's the English, here's our translation, tweak it. You know, that's a lot less time consuming.
Right.
But yeah, again, this Popup Help Class is something else I'm going to release open source. I just haven't gotten around to documenting it and cleaning it up and releasing it.
Nice stuff, though. Nice. It reminds me of the old DOS clarion, 3 lines of help on the bottom of the screen.
Yeah. Same kind of thing. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, we actually have started doing it. If you come into like setup screen, let me see if we still have these in here. No, he's removed them. We've gone with a different way there, but some of our screens we actually have little question marks beside them.
Oh, the what's this kind of idea.
Yeah.
To get a bigger explanation.
Yeah, what we do is we've got question marks behind, and then all you do is hover over that question mark, and it'll do the pop-up help. I don't know where those are. I'm doing the functionality stuff, and the owner of the app comes behind me and does a lot of that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure where he's gotten with that stuff. It makes no sense for him to pay me to do little tweaky stuff like that. So he spends his time doing that and out selling and doing those kind of things, and I do the heavy lifting of the functionality of the app. Wolfgang, I was really surprised to hear that you haven't dealt with multi-language. I figured pretty much everyone in Europe really doesn't get a choice in that matter.
No, so far my application's gone to the English audience. I've actually had not any requirements for any other languages. So.
Oh, okay. So you don't support anyone in your backyard then, huh? It's if you don't.
The funny thing is, when in our field where we operate, you talk to the guys and say what language you want to go for, and they end up saying no, English, and then they end up using English. Once or twice I had up in Africa a French request, but even then we just said, look, at this point in time we got English. Oh, that's fine, and then they just went for it.
Yeah. Now
nobody's pushed us to do any other translation. So.
Yeah. One of the things that Nick is the owner of this app, have discussed and is an issue for us. He has a couple of Arabic-speaking companies that have talked to him, and we've so far resisted even looking at it for the simple fact of the complexity really concerns me there, because it's not just the translation, it's also right to left versus left to right, which I think, I suspect that your screen layout won't even make sense to them because they're used to right to left. You know, I don't think it's just a matter of translating captions. I don't think the flow of the screen works.
Right of the box.
Right. Yeah. You know, I think just the tab order of the fields and everything else would need to be changed.
Yeah. I've kind of resisted the language stuff. When I did way back then in Clarion, I bumped into that, and there was no elegant solutions when I started with it, and
right.
I kind of kept away from it. Quite successfully. But I must say, our clients are quite happy with the language that they use. But I think it's because it's the alarm industry, the technical stuff, all the jargon is English based, because most manuals and manufacturers do it English wise. And
there are certain industries that are like that. The aircraft industry is like that as well.
Yeah, we found that with our work with World Energy. Was we offered to do multi-language, and they said no. Everybody's this stuff is all done in English.
Yeah.
So
we've had one or two like, oh, have you got another language? I said, well, we haven't got. Then I kind of, next question, is it English? Oh, that's fine. That's it. That's the end of the argument. It's like a 2-sentence question answer, and that was the end of it. I've never really got that feeling that I had to go push in that direction, and that's why we've never looked at it.
Yeah.
Well, it was units of measure. That's what everybody got upset with.
Yeah.
Nobody else in the world uses gallons.
The nice thing to know is that, you know, at least out of the box, you know, WinDev can get you, you know, it's not going to be perfect, but it'll be enough that you can, quote unquote, support another language without killing yourself. You know, it may not be perfect, but, you know, again, I think as long as you've got most of the captions translated and so forth, just enough so that they can use your application, you know what I'm saying?
And having the
That's
button
sort of,
there for the Google Translate's amazing.
yeah.
Just the click and the translate. That's nice.
Right, right. Yeah. Like I said, before I found out how to configure that, I was literally copying and pasting stuff in and out of Google Translate all day.
Same here.
And just also from your feeling from the previous IDE to this one, how much easier or more difficult is it? Is it really that's much easier to work with it?
Previous being what?
Clarion become
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Goodbye.
Ben had one of my old Clarion templates. One of his clients had an app that was using one of my old Clarion templates the other day that they had lost, and I had to fire up my VM and get into Clarion to resurrect that code so that I could send it to him. And let me tell you, I haven't opened that VM in probably 6 months, and it was a chore just to even open it. I just, for a tool that I loved and made a career on for so many years. I mean, I'd rather take a sharp stick in the eye as to open a Clarion app right now.
I think you're speaking for a lot of people there, Pete.
I'm keeping quiet.
Yeah, I do not like going in there.
Might just 100% agree, but okay, we'll keep quiet.
What are you talking about? 5.0 or 9.0?
6. I never moved past 6.3.
Okay.
I have 6.3 and VM and 7 and 8, and I have 9, but I haven't opened it.
I have 5.5.
It just breaks my head. I don't like it.
Yeah, no, I have to still go back. There's quite a bit of the code up to still change.
But 9.
But every time somebody says, the other day we had a product with a bit of a hiccup, and we had to go back to it. And I kind of say, no, I have to freaking go back to it because I just don't want to go back to it. I would rather carry on with a new one. But anyway,
Yeah,
that's life. So I'm glad to hear it's a lot easier.
Well, thanks for a great topic.
Idea, but yeah, we've never tried it. That's why I'm quite interested in how you're doing it. But it looks fairly easy compared.
Yeah. It, like I said, it's not perfect, but it's not bad by any means. I think it can get you to the point where you can say my application supports multiple languages.
Yeah.
You might end up having to do some additional tweaking once you get it in front of real native speaking users. But
you're going to get the same completeness what the PC Soft gets with their IDE. Every
yeah,
time they
exactly.
pop up English or French statement, we don't want it.
Right.
Otherwise, it's workable.
Yeah. So, it may open up some new sales avenues for you.
Yeah. That's
all right. So if there's no other questions or discussion, that was a great almost hour and a half. Good job.
Thank you.
As always, Uncle Pete, we appreciate you.
All right. Remember, there's quite a few topics tied for the next topic, so get over there and vote.
Vote.
That's it.
Okay. Have a good weekend. See you next time.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks.